Welcome to Wisconsin in Focus. I'm J.D. Davidson. Wisconsin Governor Tony Evers signed one tax cut into law this week, but balked on others. Republicans in Wisconsin are concerned again about the veto. Joining me today is the Center Square's Wisconsin contributor, Ben Yount. Ben, what did Evers sign into law? What didn't he sign into law, and what are Republicans saying?
The governor took full credit for a child care tax credit expansion. This was part of a Republican-written tax cut package. And this essentially doubles what parents can claim for their child care costs, up to $10,000 for one child, up to $20,000 for more than one child. And this puts the state of Wisconsin on equal footing as the federal credit. And so it's one of these things that anybody who has young kids who has to pay someone else to keep an eye on them knows just how expensive childcare is. And this is a very popular idea. This also is something that the governor has talked about for the better part of the past year, the rising cost of childcare. If you remember, we had some conversations here on the podcast, I'd say 5 months or so ago, about the end of the coronavirus child care bump. This was extra money that the federal government was sending to the states, that the states were then passing on to local daycares that essentially paid for pay raises for people who work there. When that money ran out, the governor begged and pushed and cajoled and threatened the legislature to send him an equal amount of money. Lawmakers never did, but the governor somehow found enough extra coronavirus dollars to pay for that to keep it continuing. Governor Evers has been very clear in his approach to child care. He wants to make sure there's more money to go to child care providers. We'll get to the Republican opposition to the tax cut here in a second, but Republicans have had a different strategy. They want to make sure there are more spots available. They want to help child care providers by getting rid of some of the regulations, making it easier for parents to start smaller daycares in their homes, particularly in smaller communities. And they want to help parents by making sure that there are enough seats at the local daycare. And so it's one of these ones, while everyone is happy to see this child care tax credit expanded, the debate over just where to go next with the child care issue remains. And so you'll expect to hear a lot of this as we head towards the election in November, and then once the new legislature is seated in January. The reason that this is being juxtaposed with the vetoes that the governor issued on other tax cut plans is because Republicans wrote this as a package. They wanted to lower income taxes in the state's second lowest and largest income tax bracket. Families, couples filing married who make under $150,000 a year. Also wanted to all but eliminate income taxes on retiree income up to $75,000. There were a couple of other plans, but those were the big ones, and the governor rejected those. It was last Friday that the governor said these are not real reforms. These are not sustainable, despite the fact that we have a $3 billion surplus and a nearly $2 billion rainy day fund. But the governor rejected what would have been middle-class tax cuts and tax cuts for retirees, and then just a few days later was patting himself on the back for signing a child tax care credit, which was originally part of that Republican tax cut package, but that somehow did not make it into the statewide announcement about helping out parents with child care.
Sticking with the child care, it seems we've talked about this a lot on this podcast. There seems to be kind of a middle that could be found if we could ever find a middle. That I see the governor's point that whether you have more seats or not, childcare is incredibly expensive for people. I see Republicans' point that whether you cut the cost or not, if you don't have enough places, it doesn't matter how much it costs. Is there some sort of compromise here, or is this just flat out going to be an election year issue?
This isn't so much going to be an election year issue because, again, everybody agrees we ought to do something to help parents who need to send their kids to childcare. It's not like abortion or, the streetcar in Milwaukee where there are two opposing sides. This is one of these philosophical differences. this is one of these, everybody wants to get to the same goal, but they don't agree how best to get there. And look, both sides have their numbers. Both sides have their studies. This is one of the cases. I mean, I've said this so much on the radio that it almost is cliche. Two things can be true at the same time. There are two different solutions. You know, paying people more is good for the people who work in these child care facilities, but that may not be better for parents. You know, making it easier for a mom to find a place to put their kids, that inevitably brings in more money for these child care providers. But then you run into the problem of, well, if you're making $10 an hour, $11 an hour watching kids at a daycare center, you can go make $15 an hour working at the Quick Trip and making egg rolls and breakfast sandwiches. And so if this was easy, let me put it this way. If this was easy, Wisconsin lawmakers would have solved this already. That's what legislatures are really good at. They're great at the easy stuff. It's the hard stuff that takes some time. But you are right. Everything that happens in Wisconsin between now and November, between really now and January, when a new legislature is sworn in, is tainted with this idea of, well, maybe I won't compromise because maybe in a couple of months I won't have to compromise.
And in the meantime, we get no tax cut and we just kind of keep kicking the can down the road.
Keep going on and going on and going on. And, you know, this is the end of a very mild winter here. So you're going to have a bunch of snowbirds come back, and maybe the $2,000 that they would have saved would have been enough to say, hey, you know what, next year I'm not. Or, you know, Florida, Tennessee, Texas, 6 months and a day. And now you don't have to pay income taxes. And that's a couple of $1,000. That's enough real money for somebody to say, maybe this is the time that I leave. Maybe this is the time I don't come back to Wisconsin. And this is a state, you know, where we have not grown in any significant way in decades.
Yeah, and I think that's a Midwest issue when you're dealing with snowbirds. Ben, thanks for joining us today. Listeners can keep up with this story and more at thecentersquare.com.
Like to stay informed on the go? Audible has an ever-growing selection of audiobooks at your fingertips. Whether it's that classic you've been meaning to get to or the new release you've been waiting for, follow the link in our show description to get 30 days of Audible free.